Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. So this is part 3, which is the final part for systems thinking tools. This lecture would include the systems archetype, structural thinking tools, and system dynamics. The idea of systems thinking is that every action should trigger a reaction or feedback. So let's recall balancing and reinforcing feedback loops. Reinforcing feedback accelerates the given trend of process, either ascending or descending, increasing or decreasing, while balancing feedback works if a goal state exists, and balancing intends to reduce the gap between a current state and a desired state to reach the equilibrium. Archetype is the name given to certain dynamics that seem to recur in many different settings, or in another word, patterns of behavior of a system that occur repeatedly in different settings. It consists of the combination of balancing and reinforcing loops or feedback. By identifying a system archetype, efficient changes can be made to improve a system. There are 7 archetypes available, but we are going to discuss on drifting goals, fixes that backfire, escalation, and limits of growth. So the first archetype is called drifting goals. So drifting goals is made up of two balancing loops. So let's say we have a situation where I try to lose my weight. So in drifting goals, so we try to have something more or other than what we currently have. So let's say we have currently I'm having my weight is 100. Okay, so I am a 100 kilo person. All right. So what I want is the weight of 50 kilo. So note that between these two there is a gap here. So gap between from me to get from what I have to get what I want. Okay, so what will I do in order to reduce the gap? So I will do some action, okay, to get what I want. So what will be the action that we can do here? So we can have some, for example, we can have some exercise, or can have a diet meal, right? Right. So as more of action is done, so I will get closer to what I want, which is the 50 kilos that I have, and making the gap smaller and smaller, but not directly you will get 50 kilos. So from 100 kilos, let's say you will get 98, and then you turn to 95, and then it turns to 90. So now the annoying character of balancing loop is that what I have is get closer and closer to what I want, the gap gets smaller and provide less of an impetus for action to get what I want. So it seems like it is taking more time to get there. So the current weight is, let's say 90. So why is uh, it feels like taking a lot of time for you to get the 50 kilos? Okay, because there are the time delay. Okay, the effect of the time delay here. Right, so at the same time, as the gap add to more action of getting what I want, is also add to a pressure to settle for less. Okay, because it feels like the 50 kilo is not doable with the current situation, even though a lot of things that you have done. So we try to reduce the gap by pressure to settle for less. So instead of 50, let's say we try 60. Okay, so we try 60 kilo. So this will subtract from what I want, of 50 to 60. So now it shows that action takes time to produce result more than the patient that we have in terms of tolerating. So it feels like it is easier to get rid of the gap by reducing what I want. Okay, so let's say the current is 98. So what I want is 60. So 60 seems like far-fetched. So let's say we try 70. And then let's say 70 is not working either. So we try for 80. So the gap is being reduced. Okay, so until it comes to the stage where the person feels that they cannot have what they want because it takes too long, it is too hard, it's not worth the effort, up until the person will feel that uh, he or she is not worthy. So that's the situation explained by drifting goals. So in summary, a gap between a goal and an actual condition can be resolved by two ways, either taking a corrective action or lowering the goal. But normally people would tend to lower the goal, which continual lowering gradually deteriorate the performance. Right. So now the behavior over time graph of a drifting goals would always look like this. So it will have three variables here. We have the solid line for goal. We have the dashes for the actual situation, and we will have dotted line here, okay, to show you the gap. So here's to show you another example of drifting goals. So based on the situation or problems that we have in drifting goals, we need to or we can apply a few strategies. So strategies to overcome is by examining the way goals are set and who sets the goal and put the goals outside the system based on the step or strategies that can be implemented, so it will not lead to the problem of the drifting goals. So the second archetype that we have is escalation or balancing loop. So when one party's actions are perceived by another party to be a threat and the second party respond in a similar manner, further increasing a threat will result in threatening actions by both parties that grow exponentially over time. So let's say we have party A and party B, which these two are actually doing the same business. They try to compete with one another by using the same strategy. This basically will produce, okay, the behavior over time graph, which look like this. See, they are growing exponentially over time. So we have parties A action, and we also have the party B's action. So the hypothesis of escalation or balancing loop is that we have two balancing loops that will create a reinforcing figure 8 effect. Right, so let's take a look at an example. So let's see the US, if the US weapon superiority is low, so it will give high threat towards the USA. Okay, so that's why we have the O symbol here. So when the threat is high to USA, what will happen is that they will produce more weapons production. Okay, so increase and increase. And then when they have a lot of weapons production, so they will have a lot of weapon stockpile. So the stockpile will increase. This in turn would increase the US weapon superiority over others. Now, what will happen if the US weapon superiority over others is high? So it will give the threat perception to other nation. So other nation will feel threatened. So when they feel threatened, what will they do? They will produce more weapons. So the weapons production is high also. And when the weapons production is high, the nation's weapon stockpile will also increase or high. So when the other nation weapons stockpile increase or high, so this will lower the US weapons superiority over others. So this example is showing the arm race, which increases the weaponry. However, this actually decreases the security for all the nation. Now, let's say we have another example in terms of the price wars which increase sales. So let's say we have two companies that keep on slashing their price in order to gain their market share. So they feel threatened by another company, so they keep on cutting its price. So this will result in the problems of having less profit or less revenues to both companies. So when they have less revenues to invest in new product and customer service, so their customer will ultimately feel the effect of those cutbacks. So what can we do, or what are the strategies that can be implemented in order to avoid the problems of escalation and balancing loop. So it requires the cooperation toward a larger goal that benefit both parties. So as one party have taken one strategy, another party need to think on other strategies that can benefit to the company and also to the customer, and they need to examine how the structure reduces results in the long run. The third archetype is called fixes that backfire. It consists of a balancing loop and a reinforcing loop. In a situation, we apply fix to a certain problem, so the problem seems to be solved. However, after a certain period of time, the problem seems to come again and it come back even worse than before. So the situation is called fixes that backfire. So for this archetype, the behavior over time graph look like this. So it will have two variable, which is the problem symptom, okay, this line, and then we have unintended consequence. So we have this dash. So let's take a look at one example of fixes that backfire. Let's say we try to save the cost on maintenance. What we can do is that we can cut the spending on the maintenance. So when we cut the spending, the expenditure will decrease. So it seems like a good solution at first. However, as the time goes by, so it will introduce another problem such as equipment breakdown. So this is because less or no maintenance has been done. So instead of only spending a little for maintenance process, you may need to spend more to fix the equipment, or worse, you may need to buy a new one. So the first loop is the balancing loop, while the second loop, the problem loop, is the reinforcing loop. So the strategies is that to look for the root cause of problem symptom and take action for both short-term and long-term solution. The fourth archetype is called limits to growth. The reinforcing process of accelerating growth will encounter a balancing process as the limit of the system is approached. So for limits to growth, it has two loop, the reinforcing and balancing loop. So the reinforcing loop, after some success, is offset by action of a balancing loop, which is the limiting condition. So a behavior over time graph for limits to growth look like this. So it will have two variable in terms of the performance. So you see the performance is increasing, and as it approach the limit, so it will decrease. And then we have the efforts, okay, where it increase over time, okay, the dashes. So for example of limits to growth, let's say we have sales which is limited by the service quality. So let's say in the first place we try to increase the sale. So in order to increase the sale, we will cut the prices and do a heavy promotion. So this in turn will increase the sales, the reinforcing loop. However, after a certain period of time, we can see that the demand is exceeding the service, and then it is approaching the limits of the service capability. So the services cannot cope with the demand that they have, which in turn will decrease the sale. So this is the balancing loop. So the limits to growth archetype help us see how the balance between these elements shifts over time and help us come to terms with the way in which, by pushing hard to overcome the constraint on our life, we make the effects of those constraints even worse than they otherwise would be. So what are the strategies that we can do is that we can look for ways to remove the limit rather than pushing harder on the growth loop. So note that sometimes the feedback or loop type uses the following symbol. So this symbol indicates reinforcing or R, and this symbol indicates balancing or B. So for example, for archetype fixes that backfire, it will look like this in the middle of the loop. Next, we will discuss on systems dynamic. Systems dynamic is an approach to understand the behavior of the complex system over time. It is very similar to system thinking as it is the foundation of it. However, system dynamics utilizes computer simulation to study the behavior of systems and the impact of alternative policies. Systems dynamics focused on flow of feedback, either reinforcing or balancing, system behaviors that are results of the flows, and impact of delay on system behaviors, questioning on what are the implications and when the delay happened. So another element of system dynamic is delay that causes systems behavior to be unpredictable and confound efforts in order to control the behavior. We can identify three systems dynamic elements: feedback, accumulation of flows into stocks, and time delay. We have go through each elements before, so let's take a quick look for revision. In system dynamics modeling, dynamic behavior is due to the principle of accumulation. The principle states that all dynamic behavior in the world occurs when flows accumulate in stocks. So stock and flow structure is the basic building block of system dynamics. Many feedback processes contain time delays. So time delay is the interruption in the flow of influence which make the consequences of actions occur gradually. In order for us to have changes, there will be some delay or some interruption. Delay exists everywhere in business system. For example, like we invest now to reap a benefit in the distant future, or let's say we hire a person today, but it may be months before he or she is fully productive. One example of delays in our everyday life would be adjusting the shower temperature. So adjusting the shower temperature, for instance, it is far more difficult when you have a 10-second delay before the water temperature being adjusted than when the delay takes only a second or two. Let's say during the 10 second after you turn up the heat, the water remains cold. So what will you do? You will think that your action has no effect. So you respond by continuing to turn up the heat. When the hot water finally arrives, you feel that it is too hot and you will turn that back again, and after another delay, the water is cold again. So each cycle of adjustment in the balancing loop compensates somewhat for the cycle before. We have come to the end of our lecture 5. So in lecture 5, we have looked into the system thinking and also system dynamic. In system thinking, we cover in terms of the system thinking tools. So we have basic and also dynamic thinking tools. So in this tool, we have feedback diagram, stock and flows, behavior over time graph, causal diagram, and also archetypes. So in system dynamic, we look into the elements which are the delay and also stock and flow. So that's all from me. Thank you everyone for paying attention. See you in the next lecture. Assalamualaikum.